ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Today we'll be starting part 3 of the Light of the Cave series, wherein we'll be exploring the third story from the stories of Surah Al-Kahf, which is the incident that took place between Musa and Khidr alayhim as-salam. We discussed in the previous session some of the underlying distinct themes of Surah Al-Kahf. We mentioned that each surah, each section of the Quran has its own distinct theme. What's the theme of Surah Al-Kahf? Anybody remember? Anybody? What's the theme of Surah Al-Kahf from last week?
I wasn't here last week. Trials.
Overcoming trials.
Overcoming trials, excellent, yes. So the underlying theme of Surah Al-Kahf is trials or overcoming trials. So in the previous two stories, we've discussed the trial of religion and the trial of wealth. In today's session, we're going to be discussing the trial of knowledge. And the trial of knowledge is something that we can look into with more intricate detail in the story of Musa and Khidr. The story of Musa and Khidr is a story that depicts divine wisdom and the deficiency of human knowledge. And what's interesting is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, thousands of years after this story had taken place, he spoke about this event to his companions sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, كان موسى خطيبا في بني إسرائيل فسئل أي الناس أعلم فقال أنا. That Musa was a public speaker among the children of the Israelites. And one day when delivering a public speech, he was asked a question. Banu Israel were the people that Musa was sent to take them out of darkness and bring them to light, which was the divine duty of every prophet who came before us. And when they posited a question to Musa alayhi salam, they said, which of the people who exist on earth have the most knowledge? And Musa thought about this question and he responded instantly, me. He assumed that he had the most knowledge, rightly so, because he was the prophet of Allah. He received divine commandment. He was described to have been Kalimullah, the one who spoke to Allah directly. And given the nature of these events that occurred, he assumed that he surpassed all of humankind in the amount of knowledge he possessed. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us in this particular report, so Allah taught him a lesson for him to gain humility through directing him towards a righteous person who superseded him in knowledge. And that was none other than this man known as Khidr alayhi salam. And this name isn't directly mentioned within the Quranic discourse, rather it's a name that's been alluded to in the works of the scholars of our tradition. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Kahf, He says, فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِّنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِّنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. So Musa, when he was traversing to find this man who he'd been directed towards seeking knowledge from, he's now gone to the ends of the earth to look for this man, determined to seek guidance and inspiration from the man who has superseded him in knowledge. And while consuming the contents of this story, it's crucial that we ask ourselves some thought-provoking questions. When we come across somebody who's better than us in a certain area, imagine that one of you here is the best footballer among his friends. And then one day you discover that there's somebody within your community who's better than you at football. How does that make you feel? Imagine that you've studied a certain topic and you have reached competency in that area. It could be literature, it could be engineering. And then you come across another person who superseded you in your level of competence. If this makes you feel uneasy, if this makes you feel bitter towards that person, then there's a fundamental problem with our hearts. Musa alayhi salam, despite being the best of creation in his time, despite having received commandment from Allah directly, despite having gained the unique high-ranking station of being Kalimullah, the one who spoke to Allah, he humbled himself in the face of this bitter reality that there was a man on the earth who was better than him in terms of the knowledge that he possessed. And not only did he accept that reality, but he worked tirelessly to meet this man with complete determination, with one hope: I want to learn from him. I want to become better through sitting at the feet of this man who's better than me in the knowledge that he possesses. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that Musa, while traversing on his path to find this man, Allah describes this man. He says he's a slave among our devout slaves. And we have given him mercy that has come from above, it's divine mercy. And we have taught him knowledge from us that people don't have access to. And this is a direct indication that Khidr, he possessed divine knowledge. And the people on the earth are only able to understand the affairs that are available to them, using their cognitive faculties and the knowledge that the Prophet has made clear to them. But as for Khidr, he's receiving direct revelation of hidden affairs that the average person is completely oblivious to. And for this very reason, he was considered to be more superior than Musa in his knowledge. So now Musa is very eager to find this man and learn from him. And it's a sign of sincerity, a sign of genuineness, that Musa wants to reach a station where he can connect better with his Lord through gaining this knowledge that Khidr possesses. Allah then goes on to further illustrate this story. قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا. When he finds this man eventually, after days of travel, after bearing many unexpected difficulties, the first thing he says to this righteous person is, am I going to follow you on the basis that you teach me that which you've been taught divinely? Musa is so eager, he's cutting to the chase with this man. He doesn't want to waste any time. He wants to consume the knowledge that this man has to become a better individual. His keenness to learn is very vivid and apparent. To which Khidr alayhi salam, he says very abruptly, قَالَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. That, oh Musa, the same way I possess knowledge that you don't possess, I also know through the knowledge I've been given in a divine manner that you will not have the patience to hear me out. Musa in his character alayhi salam was very hasty, very firm, and he had this human instinct to stand up for justice without even thinking. So Khidr understood that his hastiness and his desire for good would result in him not being able to bear the troubles of traversing this path of seeking knowledge. To which then he says to Musa alayhi salam, وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطُ بِهِ خُبْرًا. But I don't blame you, O Musa. How are you supposed to have patience upon a thing that you've not even understood? The knowledge that I'm going to teach you, you aren't even aware of its extent and its majesty. So for that reason, you may not understand where I'm coming from, but just know you will not be able to be patient. To which Musa makes a promise, a genuine promise. قَالَ سَتَجِدُنِي إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ صَابِرًا. But let me make you a promise that you'll find me to be very patient. وَلَا أَعْصِي لَكَ أَمْرًا. And I will not disobey you. Musa isn't just making a conscious decision to learn from a man who's better than him. He's also making a decision to submit to this man because he understands Allah has given him something that he doesn't have. He understood that man's strength and he identified his own weakness. And this is among the humbling qualities that Musa alayhi salam possessed. So this man says, فَإِنِ اتَّبَعْتَنِي فَلَا تَسْأَلْنِي عَنْ شَيْءٍ حَتَّى أُحْدِثَ لَكَ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا. Let's agree that you're not going to question me in anything, and I will assume that you are going to be patient. So until I make mention to you of this knowledge that you're seeking, do not pester me. Don't keep posing questions to me. Don't be impatient. If I notice that you are doing any of the aforementioned things, your journey will come to an end. To which Musa alayhi salam, he agreed. So he commands Musa to accompany him on a journey. And along this journey, 3 separate events occur. And these events are very significant in understanding the implied moral behind the story of Musa and Khidr. The first event Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala narrates to us, فَانْطَلَقَا حَتَّى إِذَا رَكِبَا فِي السَّفِينَةِ خَرَقَهَا. That they continued their journey up until they came to the seashore. There was a ship, and Musa and Khidr needed to board this ship to get to their desired destination. So Allah tells us the moment Khidr, he boarded the ship, he made a hole in the ship. And Musa ﷺ is looking at this man, that these people have allowed us to board this ship and to kindly take us to our desired destination. And you are now damaging their property. And these are the thoughts that are kind of lingering in Musa's mind, that he's not expressing out of the fear of disobeying the command that Khidr had put forth. But Musa couldn't help himself because of his human instinct and his never-ending desire to be just in the face of oppression and wrongness. He said to him, أَخَرَقْتَهَا لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا إِمْرًا. But why have you made a hole in this ship? Are you trying to drown the people who helped us? Are you trying to deceive the very people who extended to us help and assistance? You've done something that's very unethical. I didn't expect this from a man of your caliber and your high-ranking station. And Khidr is now looking at Musa, and he says to him, أَلَمْ أَقُلْ لَكَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. That didn't I say to you before you started this journey, you will not be able to be patient with the things I'm going to teach you. And it's very important to understand that Musa is judging these events of what he can see, based off his own understanding of the affairs that are happening. Whereas Khidr has divine commandments that he's fulfilling. So he has access to divine knowledge. And based off that access that he has to what Allah wants from him and Musa, he is acting accordingly. But Musa isn't taking this into consideration. So Khidr says to Musa alayhi salam, if this happens one more time, then I am not going to allow you to continue this journey. And Musa alayhi salam, he says to Khidr while accepting his fault and mistake, لا تؤاخذني بما نسيت ولا ترهقني من أمري عسرا. That don't take me to account for something I've forgotten. All human beings make mistakes. I made a mistake. Overlook my mistake and you will find me of those who continue to be patient. I won't question you again. So Khidr gives Musa another chance. And now they've moved on. They've left the ship that Khidr had made a hole in. But the people didn't drown. But Musa was concerned that this hole would lead the people to drowning. And now they move on to the next destination. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَانْطَلَقَا حَتَّى إِذَا لَقِيَ غُلَامًا فَقَتَلَهُ قَالَ أَقَتَلْتَ نَفْسًا زَكِيَّةً أَقَتَلْتَ نَفْسًا زَكِيَّةً بِغَيْرِ نَفْسٍ لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا نُكْرًا. Now they're traveling through a community where children are playing. And while Musa and Khidr are walking side by side, Khidr forcefully takes one of the children and he eliminates that child. And Musa is watching in shock. He can't believe the fact that this man has now gone even further and he's killed a child. How is this possible? And Musa can't control himself. He can't contain his emotions and sentiments out of anger and frustration. He says to Khidr, أَقَتَلْتَ نَفْسًا زَكِيَّةً بِغَيْرِ نَفْسٍ لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا نُكْرًا. That how have you killed an innocent soul? The boy that you killed didn't kill other people. This punishment wasn't warranted. You've done something obnoxious, something unacceptable. So now Musa is becoming more and more angry towards Khidr. If we compare his response to the hole in the ship to his response to the killing of this innocent child, it's very evident within the language that Allah is using in this surah that Musa is becoming increasingly infuriated. He cannot bear the fact that this man is continuing to carry out violation upon violation. And to which Khidr is very patiently and calmly saying, أَلَمْ أَقُلْ أَنَّكَ إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. That once again, didn't I tell you, you don't have it in you to be patient with me. And then he says, Musa alayhi salam says to Khidr following this, because he understands he keeps breaking his initial promise. That after having promised that I will not keep asking you about the matters that you are teaching me about, he keeps doing that. So he says, إن سألتك عن شيء بعدها فلا تصاحبني قد بلغت من لدني عذرا. That if this happens one more time and I pose a question to you again, despite having promised you, then don't accompany me. You can tread on your own path, I'll tread on my own path. We'll depart paths. And it's very important that we understand both perspectives here. That one man who is Musa is acting upon the limited knowledge that he has at his disposal. And the other man who is Khidr has unlimited access to divine knowledge that Allah has given to him out of His mercy. And he is acting according to that divine knowledge. And we're going to draw benefits and expound on these matters further shortly. So now they're at the verge of coming to the end of this journey. They move on from the killing of this innocent child. And they go on to the third incident. Now they've been traveling for a long time and Musa is hungry. Khidr is tired. So they approach a village. فانطلقا حتى إذا أتيا أهل قرية استطعما أهلها فأبوا أن يضيفوهما. So they come to this village now and they're feeling overwhelmingly hungry and tired. So the inhabitants of this village, culturally speaking, in that time, people are known to be very hospitable towards travelers. In fact, even if you travel to certain villages within the Middle East, you'll find that they have taps and they have food for travelers who are walking past. This is something that was embedded within their culture. They were very, very hospitable people. So given this reality, Musa and Khidr were expecting hospitality from the inhabitants of this village. But he found that these people were very rude and they had no intention of showing any hospitality to them. They refused them food, they refused them shelter, they refused to fulfill any of their basic needs. So now Musa is very angry at these people. And these people have no idea that these two men are men who are chosen by Allah. And many of the scholars are of the opinion that Khidr himself was also a prophet like Musa, who was sent to different people. And that's why he had divine knowledge at his disposal. But the people of this village have no idea who they're dealing with. They're under the impression that these are just two ordinary men and there are no repercussions for denying them their basic rights. So as they're walking away from this village, Allah Azza wa Jal says, فَوَجَدَ فِيهَا جِدَارًا يُرِيدُ أَن يَنْقَضَّ فَأَقَامَ. That Khidr is noticing there's a wall. And this wall is at the brink of collapsing. So Khidr, he fixes this wall. And Musa is looking at him confused. That these people have violated our right. They've refused to fulfill our basic needs and you are fixing their wall for them. Musa goes further and he says to Khidr alayhi salam, لو شئت لاتخذت عليه أجرا. That if you wanted to, you could have charged them money for fixing the wall. And we could have used that money to buy some food, to rid ourselves of basic starvation. Musa is frustrated. And now Khidr, he reaches the extent of his patience. And this is why he says to Musa alayhi salam, هذا فراق بيني وبينك. سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا. That me and you, our journey ends here. I cannot stay with you any longer. You've proven to me you don't have the patience to hear the interpretation of these events that you've failed to apprehend properly. So now we're going to go our separate ways, but I'm going to teach you why I did what I did. Just so you can understand that not everything is as simple as it seems. Not everything is black and white. So Khidr alayhi salam starts to unpack all the events that have occurred throughout the past day or so, to teach Musa that he does not have all the knowledge he thinks he has. And that through using our basic cognitive faculties, just through using our intellect, our eyes, our ears, we can't always reach the truth. Humans are very deficient in the amount of knowledge that they possess. Khidr alayhi salam, he says, أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر فأردت أن أعيبها وكان وراءهم ملك يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا. He says to Musa, as for the ship that you questioned me about, you kept saying I put a hole in the ship to drown its inhabitants. In fact, that there's a king who rules that particular region And he's known to take the ships off people oppressively and forcefully. He goes to people and he takes their property forcefully in an oppressive fashion. And I know that if I made this ship deficient through making a hole in the ship, the king would not take that ship. Because it sees it as something not worth taking from the people who rightfully own the ship. So me placing a hole in the ship, there's divine wisdom within that. Wisdom that Musa alayhi salam couldn't recognize. And then he continues to expound. وَأَمَّا الْغُلَامُ فَكَانَ أَبَوَاهُ مُؤْمِنَيْنِ فَخَشِينَا أَن يُرْهِقَهُمَا طُغْيَانًا وَكُفْرًا. As for the young boy, his parents were very righteous. And they were believers, firm believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we feared that he would be a source of punishment and sorrow for them. So Allah wanted to remove the boy and replace him with a child who was more righteous and pious. This was something that was preordained. And Khidr was following that divine commandment. And then he goes on. وَأَمَّا الْجِدَارُ فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ يَتِيمَيْنِ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ وَكَانَ تَحْتَهُ كَنْزًا لَهُمَا وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. And as for the wall that was at the brink of collapsing, and we came across this wall after its people had denied us our basic rights, and you were infuriated by my actions. It was revealed to me that beneath this wall was treasure that was placed there by two righteous people, parents. And this treasure they'd placed beneath the wall was for their children, who are now young orphans. If that wall collapsed, that wealth, that treasure would be exploited by the people who live here. And those orphans would have no share of that treasure that is rightfully theirs. So I rebuilt this wall with the hope of preserving that which is rightfully theirs. And then towards the end of this story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that Khidr alayhi salam, to console Musa and to declare his own innocence, وَمَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي ذَلِكَ تَأْوِيلُ مَا لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ عَلَيْهِ صَبْرًا. That everything I did was not done based on my own whims or desires. Rather, I did what I did because I was commanded to do so by my Lord. And this is something you weren't able to apprehend, O Musa. What are the lessons that we can draw from the story of Musa and Khidr? The first lesson is humility. And we live in a society that advocates self-glorification. I discussed this in one of the previous sessions. That even to get a basic job, we have to sell ourselves to the employer. We have to make up things about ourselves that aren't even true just to secure a job in a workplace. We live in a very algorithm-driven society where we do everything for a like and a subscription, without even understanding why we're doing that thing. Whether it's a joke that offends somebody, it's a statement that displeases our Lord, it's an action that's seen as immoral and unethical. These things become secondary. The only thing we focus on is gaining that validity from people, gaining that fame at the expense of religious values and principles. And living in a society like this, it becomes very difficult to develop humility. And in the context of human knowledge, because this is the moral behind the story of Musa and Khidr, is a deficiency of human knowledge. In a liberal society, human knowledge is deemed the pinnacle of truth. Scientists of today, and we're living in an ever-growing atheistic society, where people think that human beings have reached the definitive conclusion with respect to how the world came to play and that God does not exist. And this fosters a sense of pride, self-amazement, self-admiration, completely neglecting the duties and the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this story teaches us just how deficient human beings are. It teaches us how dependent we are upon the knowledge of the Almighty, the All-Great Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A veil is placed between our faculties, our senses, our understanding, and the divine knowledge that Allah possesses of the affairs that we misinterpret again and again. When our car broke down in an urban area where we had no access to a phone, we had no access to help, it could be the car was ordained to break down to avoid a major accident. When one of our parents are taken into hospital and they have a chronic illness and we're belly aching and we're questioning the decree of Allah, this could be to spare them from something even greater. We possess a pixel while Allah possesses the entire photo. And this is what the story is teaching us. And the Prophet ﷺ in this context said, "Man tawada'a lillahi rafa'ahu Allahu darajat." That when a person lowers himself to Allah, he displays humility, Allah raises him in rank and in station. And the more a person comes to know of the majesty of Allah and His traits and His qualities and His beautiful names, the more a person humbles himself and recognizes his own deficiency, his own insignificance. And that's the first lesson we know from this story. That Musa was humbled, and Musa's story became humbling for others. And that's because he understood that he had a weakness that Khidr alayhi salam didn't have. And that was understanding affairs in a discerning fashion. He could see something that Musa couldn't see. The second lesson is trusting in Allah's plan. Every situation is a situation of advantage for a believing person. Regardless of what happens in our life, there's always positive in that. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ajaban li amri al-mu'min." Wondrous is the affair of the believer. And the companions are listening to this statement, a very categorical statement, bearing in mind that a believer can go through unbearable pain and agony in this world. And despite this, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, the affair of the believer is wondrous. If he is struck with difficulty, he's patient. And there's so much goodness in him being patient. And if he's given ease upon ease, he's thankful. And there's so much goodness in being thankful. وَلَيْسَ ذَاكَ لِأَحَدٍ إِلَّا لِلْمُؤْمِنِ. And that's for nobody but the believing person. Here, two situations are mentioned that we will alternate between up until our souls depart our bodies. Comfort and ease, and adversity and difficulty. We'll always be alternating between these two scenarios in our lives. And both scenarios have overwhelming good accompanied with them. And that all depends on the mindset of the believing person. Does he judge all the events in his life according to his deficient understanding? Or does he know and understand that what Allah has planned for me is better? I can't see what's around the corner, I can only see what's in front of me. And Allah tells us, further echoes this notion in the Quran. عَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ. That perhaps you like a thing but it's bad for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. And it's possible you like a thing but it's not good for you. وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah has the knowledge of all that and you have no knowledge. Trusting in Allah's plan is a fundamental ingredient to a happy life. In fact, even modern day mental health experts have explicitly talked about the worries and the agony and the deterioration in health that's accompanied with having so much worry about financial strain, about difficulties in life, about traumas. We are fortunate as believing people that we've been given so many spiritual tools to navigate our challenges. And just this tool here, trusting in Allah's plan, at-tawakkul, having reliance upon Him. And the Prophet ﷺ said that let your trust and reliance in your Lord be like that of the birds. تَغْدُو خِصَامًا وَتَرُوحُ بِطَانًا. They leave with an empty stomach and they return with their stomachs full. Because of something deep rooted within their hearts. And that's reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person establishes a connection with Allah, understands Him for who He is, nothing in this life can shake that person's faith and connection. Irrespective of what happens, it's interpreted in a positive light. The bad becomes the good. And even the good, to some degree, makes that person cautious. It doesn't allow him to become complacent. He's thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next lesson that we learn is standing up for justice is a human instinct. That despite the fact that there were so many strings attached to this deal that was made between Musa and Khidr, He broke the agreement every time. And this agreement wasn't broken for some personal benefit or gain. Rather, it was broken under the banner of humanity. You're wronging people. You're vandalizing their property. Don't do that. You're killing an innocent person. Stop. These people are wronging us. It's upon us to teach them that if they wrong us, we will not help them. Don't rebuild that wall. Everything Musa said was under the banner of humanity. And when we see what's happening in the world today, and living in a Western progressive liberal society, where the suffering of Muslims in Palestine is being overshadowed, where the suffering of Muslims throughout the globe is something that's being dismissed, it's a responsibility for every one of us to speak out against oppression and violation and wrong, irrespective of where we are and who we're with. And in this context, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that whoever sees an evil, let him remove that evil with his hand. If he's not able to, then remove the evil with his tongue. If he's not able to, then hate it in his heart. And that's the weakest of Iman. I.e., that's the bare minimum. And this teaches us that we should all be representatives of Islam, ambassadors of Islam, within our workplaces, our families, in our communities. Any opportunity to speak out against wrong, we should capitalize on it. And Musa alayhi salam was doing this subconsciously. He didn't consciously think, I'm going to break this agreement and upset Khidr, this righteous person who's better than me. No, it was instinctive. Something he did without thinking because of his love for standing up for justice. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to act upon the knowledge we learn. We ask Allah to rid our hearts and our minds of any pride and ego. We ask Allah to allow us to embody humility. We ask Allah to make us of those who act upon the lessons we draw from His noble book. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.